December 23, 1951, 4:47 p.m. Mrs. Sarah Coleman stood on the sidewalk at 128th Street watching city workers board up her restaurant. 23 years she'd run Coleman's Kitchen. 23 years feeding Harlem families who couldn't always pay. Now the health department had shut her down on violations she knew didn't exist. The inspector, a man named Donald Reeves, stood beside his car counting cash. $300. That was the price the White Restaurant Owners Association had paid to eliminate their competition. Sarah had nowhere to turn. No lawyer would take her case against the city. No politician would fight for a black woman in Harlem. She was finished. Then a black Cadillac pulled up. The back door opened. Bumpy Johnson stepped out, looked at the boarded windows, looked at Sarah's face, looked at Inspector Reeves counting his bribe money. "Mrs. Coleman," Bumpy said quietly, "go home. Your restaurant opens tomorrow morning. Same time as always." What nobody knew, what the history books won't tell you, is that in the next 19 hours, Bumpy Johnson would dismantle a citywide conspiracy, bankrupt a corrupt inspector, force 3 white business owners to leave New York, and create a protection system for Harlem businesses that would last for decades. And he did it all without throwing a single punch. To understand what Bumpy Johnson did that December night, you need to understand what Harlem looked like in 1951. This was post-war America. Black soldiers had just returned from fighting for freedom overseas, only to find they still couldn't eat at most restaurants in their own country. Harlem was packed, bursting with nearly 250,000 black Americans who'd moved north looking for opportunity. The neighborhood was a powder keg of potential, struggling against systematic oppression that worked through 1,000 small cruelties every single day. White business associations controlled most of the supply chains. If you ran a black-owned restaurant, you paid more for meat. You paid more for produce. You paid more for everything, and if you complained, suddenly you couldn't get supplies at all. The health department was the enforcement arm. Corrupt inspectors like Donald Reeves would show up with clipboards, manufacture violations, and offer a simple choice. Pay the fine, accept the temporary closure, go out of business, or pay the bribe and stay open until next month's shakedown. It was systematic. It was organized. And it was destroying black-owned businesses across Harlem at the rate of 3 or 4 per month. By 1951, Bumpy Johnson was 44 years old and had been running Harlem's numbers operation for nearly a decade. He'd survived prison, wars with Dutch Schultz's old crew, and constant pressure from the Italian mob. But what most people didn't understand about Bumpy was this: the numbers racket wasn't about getting rich. It was about building power to protect his community from exactly this kind of systematic destruction. When a black family couldn't make rent, Bumpy paid it. When a Harlem kid showed promise but couldn't afford college, Bumpy sent them. When white landlords tried to evict entire buildings to jack up prices, Bumpy made phone calls that made the evictions disappear. He wasn't a gangster who happened to help people. He was a community protector who happened to run an illegal lottery to fund that protection. Sarah Coleman had been on Bumpy's radar for years. Her restaurant fed anybody who was hungry, whether they could pay or not. During the Depression, she'd kept half of 128th Street alive. She'd fed Bumpy himself a dozen times when he was younger and broke. That restaurant wasn't just a business. It was a community institution. And now it was being destroyed by a system designed to keep black businesses small, weak, and temporary. The conspiracy against Sarah Coleman had started 3 months earlier at the Riverside Restaurant Association meeting in October 1951. The association was 23 white-owned restaurants in the neighborhoods surrounding Harlem. They met monthly at the Riverside Club on the Upper West Side to discuss business, coordinate pricing, and protect their territory. That October, a restaurant owner named George Patterson raised a concern. "We're losing customers to that place on 128th, George said, smoking a cigarette. "Coleman's Kitchen, colored woman runs it. She's serving dinner for half what we charge, and people are crossing into Harlem to eat there." Another owner, Michael Brennan, nodded. "I've lost 30% of my lunch business this year, all going to that place and 2 others like it. They're undercutting us." "So raise your quality," someone suggested. George slammed his hand on the table. "Quality's not the issue. Price is the issue. These Harlem places are running on nothing, no overhead, no regulations. They're cutting corners and making us look bad." That's when Donald Reeves spoke up. Reeves was a health inspector for the city, but he also owned 3 diners in Queens. He attended these meetings as a courtesy member, and everyone knew his real value wasn't his business advice but his access to city enforcement power. "I can handle it," Reeves said simply. "Give me a list of the places causing problems. I'll find violations, shut them down for a few months. By the time they reopen, they'll be broke and you'll have your customers back." How much? George asked. 300 per restaurant, cash, I'll make it look legitimate. Health code violations, structural issues, I've done it before. The room went quiet. What Reeves was proposing was blatantly illegal, a clear abuse of city power. It was also exactly what they wanted. By the end of the meeting, they had a list of 7 Harlem restaurants. Coleman's Kitchen was at the top. What the Riverside Restaurant Association didn't know, what Donald Reeves never suspected, was that one of their waiters, a young man named Thomas who worked at George Patterson's restaurant, was Jerome's cousin. And Jerome, the same parking attendant who'd helped Bumpy in 1958, worked for Bumpy in 1951 too. Thomas had heard everything. 2 days later, he told Jerome. 3 hours after that, Jerome was sitting in Bumpy's office above Small's Paradise. "They're going after Mrs. Coleman's place," Jerome said, sliding a napkin across the desk with 7 restaurant names written on it. "Health inspector named Donald Reeves. He's taking bribes to shut down black businesses. $300 per hit." Bumpy looked at the list. He recognized every name. These weren't just restaurants. They were community anchors, places where Harlem families celebrated birthdays, held funeral receptions, gathered after church. Destroying them would gut the neighborhood's economic foundation. "When?" Bumpy asked. "Soon, maybe this week, maybe next." Thomas said Reeves was eager, called it easy money. Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. He could handle Reeves directly, make him understand that touching Harlem businesses was hazardous to his health. But that would only stop one inspector. The restaurant association would just find another, and another. No, Bumpy needed to send a message that would stop this permanently. He needed to dismantle the system, not just inconvenience it. "Get me everything on Donald Reeves," Bumpy said. "Where he lives, where he eats, where he banks, every restaurant he owns, every person he knows, everything." Jerome nodded and left. Over the next 3 weeks, Bumpy built a complete picture of Donald Reeves's life. The man was corrupt from his shoes to his scalp. He had gambling debts at 2 illegal clubs in Queens. He was sleeping with his secretary while his wife thought he was working late. He'd taken bribes not just from the restaurant association, but from a dozen other businesses over the years. Most importantly, Reeves was stupid. He kept records of his bribes in a ledger he thought was hidden in his desk drawer. He bragged about his schemes to friends after his 4th drink. He left trails everywhere, confident that his city position made him untouchable. Bumpy also learned something else. Reeves was planning to hit Coleman's Kitchen right before Christmas. Maximum impact. Closing a restaurant during the holidays would bankrupt it before New Year's. On December 20th, Bumpy made 3 phone calls. One to a city councilman who owed Bumpy multiple favors. One to a newspaper reporter who'd been trying to expose health department corruption for 2 years. And one to the Queens District Attorney's Office, where an ambitious young prosecutor named Robert Morgenthau was building a reputation for going after corrupt officials. Then Bumpy waited. He knew Reeves would come. He knew when. He knew how. And he had a surprise that would end this scheme forever. December 23, 1951, 2:30 p.m. Donald Reeves walked into Coleman's Kitchen carrying his clipboard and his authority like weapons. Sarah Coleman met him at the door. 2 of her employees, cooking staff who'd been with her for years, stood nervously in the kitchen. "Health Department inspection," Reeves announced, not bothering with pleasantries. He walked through the restaurant writing furiously on his clipboard. "No soap in the bathroom," he wrote, though there was soap. "Grease on the stovetop," he wrote, though the stove was spotless. "Improper food storage," he wrote, though everything was stored by code. "Rodent evidence," he wrote, though the place was immaculate. After 20 minutes, he tallied up violations like he was shopping for groceries. "I'm seeing significant health code violations," Reeves said, handing Sarah an official closure notice. "This establishment is shut down effective immediately. You can appeal, but that takes 6 months. Merry Christmas." He walked to his car where George Patterson and Michael Brennan were waiting a block away to celebrate. They'd gotten their Christmas present. Coleman's Kitchen was done. By 4:47 p.m., city workers were boarding up the windows. Sarah stood on the sidewalk watching her life's work disappear behind plywood sheets. That's when Bumpy's Cadillac arrived. Bumpy stepped out, assessed the situation in 5 seconds, and made his promise. "Go home, your restaurant opens tomorrow morning." What happened in the next 19 hours was Bumpy Johnson conducting a masterclass in strategic pressure. First, Bumpy went to see Donald Reeves, not at his office. At his home in Queens, where his wife and 2 daughters were decorating their Christmas tree. Bumpy knocked on the door at 8:15 p.m. Reeves opened it, saw who was standing there, and went pale. "Mr. Johnson," Reeves stammered, "I don't know what you think." "I don't think anything," Bumpy interrupted. "I know everything. I know about the $300 from the Restaurant Association. I know about the 7 Harlem businesses on your list. I know about every bribe you've taken for the last 5 years. Bumpy held up a manila envelope. This is a ledger, your ledger, the one you keep in your desk drawer. I had someone borrow it, make copies, return it. You never even noticed. Reeves's face went from pale to gray. I also know about Claire, Bumpy continued, referring to Reeves's secretary. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the falsified inspection reports. And tomorrow morning, the Queen's district attorney knows, too. Unless what? Reeves whispered. Unless you're at Coleman's kitchen at 8 a.m. tomorrow with a new inspection report showing 0 violations. Unless you call your restaurant association friends tonight and tell them the deal's off. Unless you resign from the health department effective immediately. And unless you disappear from New York by New Year's Day. You can't do this. Bumpy's voice dropped to something colder. I already did. You have one chance to walk away from this. Take it. Because if I see your face in Harlem again, if I hear about you touching another black business, if I even hear your name in a conversation, every document in this envelope goes to the DA, the newspapers, and your wife. In that order. Bumpy left the envelope on the doorstep and walked away. Reeves stood in his doorway, watching his entire world collapse into that manila folder. That was Move 1. Move 2 happened at 10:30 p.m. at the Riverside Club, where the restaurant association was having their Christmas party. Bumpy didn't go himself. He sent Illinois Gordon with a message for George Patterson, Michael Brennan, and every other owner who'd paid into the scheme. The message was simple. The health department scheme was over. Donald Reeves was resigning. Every bribe payment had been documented. And if any member of the association ever tried something like this again, their liquor licenses would be revoked, their health inspections would become very thorough, and their suppliers would suddenly have trouble delivering. Illinois delivered this message politely but clearly. The party ended early. Move 3 was the most important. At midnight, Bumpy met with City Councilman Edward Davis at a late-night diner in Brooklyn. I need something from you, Bumpy said. More than a favor, a change. What kind of change? Davis asked. Bumpy pushed papers across the table. These are 17 documented cases of health department inspectors taking bribes to shut down black-owned businesses. This pattern goes back 6 years. I want you to introduce legislation that requires a second inspector to verify any closure. I want surprise audits of health department records. I want accountability. That's going to make powerful people angry. Those powerful people are systematically destroying my community, Bumpy replied. You want my continued support in your district. This is the price. Make this happen. Davis looked at the documentation. It was thorough, detailed, and damning. If this became public, heads would roll throughout the health department. I'll introduce it next session, Davis said. You'll introduce it next week, Bumpy corrected. Christmas recess is over January 2nd. This legislation gets filed January 3rd. Davis nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't a request. December 24th, 1951, 7:53 a.m. Sarah Coleman stood outside her boarded-up restaurant, confused. Bumpy had told her to come at 8. She didn't know why. She didn't know what was going to happen. At exactly 8 a.m., a city car pulled up. Donald Reeves got out, carrying official paperwork. He looked sick, defeated, like a man who'd seen his life destroyed in 12 hours. Mrs. Coleman, Reeves said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to apologize. Yesterday's inspection was conducted improperly. I've reviewed my findings and found significant errors. This is a new report showing your establishment is in full compliance with all health codes. He handed her the official document. Every violation had been reversed, every citation removed. The restaurant was cleared to reopen immediately. Furthermore, Reeves continued, pulling down the plywood boards himself, I'm submitting my resignation to the health department effective today. Personal reasons. Sarah stared at him, then at Bumpy, who'd been standing quietly at the corner watching everything unfold. Reeves got in his car and drove away. He left New York 3 days later and never returned. By 9:30 a.m., Coleman's kitchen was serving breakfast. The entire neighborhood showed up. They'd heard rumors about what happened, pieces of the story filtering through Harlem's incredible gossip network. They knew Bumpy Johnson had done something. They didn't know exactly what, but they knew their community had been protected. What they didn't see were the other 6 restaurants on that list receiving similar visits, similar reversals, similar protections. Bumpy had saved all of them in a single night of strategic pressure that never required violence, never made headlines, never appeared in any official record. George Patterson sold his restaurant in February and moved to Philadelphia. Michael Brennan closed 2 of his 3 locations by March. The Riverside Restaurant Association disbanded by summer. And the legislation Councilman Davis introduced passed in April 1952, creating new oversight that made the bribe scheme impossible to repeat. The story of Coleman's kitchen spread through Harlem like every other Bumpy Johnson legend, but with a crucial difference. This one showed a side of Bumpy that white newspapers never covered and that the NYPD never acknowledged. He wasn't just a numbers runner. He wasn't just a gangster who happened to be generous. Bumpy Johnson was running a shadow government in Harlem, providing the protection and services that official government refused to give black citizens. When the city wouldn't protect black businesses, Bumpy did. When the police wouldn't stop corrupt officials, Bumpy did. When the courts wouldn't deliver justice, Bumpy did. The system he built that winter of 1951 expanded throughout the 1950s. By 1955, every black-owned business in Harlem knew they had protection. Touch one of them and you answered to Bumpy Johnson. That protection wasn't free. Businesses contributed to the system through various channels, supporting the network that kept them safe. But unlike the mob's protection rackets, Bumpy's system actually delivered protection. It wasn't extortion. It was mutual aid. Sarah Coleman ran her restaurant for another 16 years. When she finally retired in 1967, she'd served an estimated 2 million meals to Harlem residents. At her retirement party, she gave a short speech that most people in the room understood. "I've been blessed to serve this community for 39 years, Sarah said, but I wouldn't have made it past 23 without someone who believed that protecting Harlem businesses wasn't just good business, it was moral duty. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for everything you've done that people don't talk about." Bumpy was in the room. He raised his glass but said nothing. That was his way. The work spoke louder than words. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, but the protection system he built lasted into the 1970s. The legislation passed in 1952 remained on the books for decades, preventing the kind of systematic corruption that had targeted Coleman's kitchen. The 7 restaurants he saved that Christmas continued operating, employing hundreds of people, feeding thousands more. But here's what most people miss about that December night in 1951. Bumpy Johnson proved something profound about power and protection. The most effective way to help your community isn't through charity. It's through building systems that prevent them from being victimized in the first place. Charity is giving someone money for rent one time. Protection is making sure they never face discriminatory eviction. Charity is paying someone's medical bill. Protection is making sure predatory billing never happens. Charity is temporary. Systems are permanent. That's what Bumpy understood. That's what he built. And that's why Harlem protected him right back. When the mafia tried to move in, Harlem residents became Bumpy's eyes and ears. When the police came after him, Harlem witnesses developed selective memory. When the government finally sent him to prison, Harlem waited for him to come back, because he'd built something more powerful than. He'd built trust. If this story moved you, hit that like button. And if you're finally understanding who Bumpy Johnson really was, hit subscribe because we're dropping these untold stories every week. Next video reveals how Bumpy Johnson paid for 47 kids to go to college in the 1960s without anyone knowing until after his death. Drop a comment. Did you know about Bumpy's community protection work? What's the most important way we can protect our communities today? Turn on notifications because next week we're covering the time Bumpy Johnson stopped a race riot before it started by doing something nobody expected. You're not going to believe that one. Remember, respect isn't given. It's earned through action. And Bumpy Johnson earned his by protecting Harlem when nobody else would.